All right, let's read another chapter or another essay from Dr. Johnson's Rambler in this beautiful 200-year-old volume. In this case, we're going to read Rambler number 41 for Tuesday, August 7th, 1750, the title of which is The Advantages of Memory. Here we go. And there's a bit of Latin here. I'll try to read. Nulla recordanti los est ingratia gravisque, nulla fuit cujus non memise velit, ampliat atis spontium sibi vir bonus hoc est, vire his bis vis posse privore fruri. That's by Mart. I think it's a shortened version. I don't know who the full name is. Boy, did I butcher that. Okay, here's some English. Another quote. No day's remembrance shall the good regret, nor wish one bitter moment to forget. They stretch the limits of this narrow span, and by enjoying, live past life again. That's by F. Lewis. I like that. Here we go. So few of the hours of life are filled up with objects adequate to the mind of man, and so frequently are we in want of present pleasure or employment that we are forced to have recourse every moment to the past and future for supplemental satisfactions, and relieve the vacuities of our being by recollection of former passages or anticipation of events to come. I cannot but consider this necessity of searching on every side for matter on which the attention may be employed as a strong proof of the superior and celestial nature of the soul of man. We have no reason to believe that other creatures have higher faculties or more extensive capacities than the preservation of themselves or their species requires. They seem always to be fully employed, or to be completely at ease without employment, to feel few intellectual miseries or pleasures, and to have no exuberance of understanding to lay out upon curiosity or caprice, but to have their minds exactly adapted to their bodies, with few other ideas than such as corporal pain or pleasure impress upon them. Of memory, which makes so large a part of the excellence of the human soul, and which has so much influence upon all its other powers, but a small portion has been allotted to the animal world. We do not find the grief with which the dames lament the loss of their young, proportionate to the tenderness with which they caress, the assiduity with which they feed, or the vehemence with which they defend them. Their regard for their offspring, when it is before their eyes, is not, in appearance, less than that of a human parent. But when it is taken away, it is very soon forgotten, and after a short absence, if brought again, wholly disregarded. That they have very little remembrance of anything once out of reach of their senses, and scarce any power of comparing the present with the past, and regulating their conclusions from experience, may be gathered from this, that their intellects are produced in their full perfection. The sparrow that was hatched last spring makes her first nest the ensuing season, of the same materials and with the same art as in any following year. And the hen conducts and shelters her first brood of chickens with all the prudence that she ever attains. It has been asked by men who love to perplex anything that is plain or to common understanding, how reason differs from instinct. And Prior has, with no great propriety, made Solomon himself declare that to distinguish them is the fool's ignorance, and the pedant's pride. To give an accurate answer to a question of which the terms are not completely understood is impossible. We do not know in what either reason or instinct consists, and therefore cannot tell with exactness how they differ. But surely He that contemplates a ship and a bird's nest will not be long without finding out that the idea of the one was impressed at once and continued through all the progressive descents of the species without variation or improvement, and that the other is the result of experiments compared with experiments, has grown by accumulated observation from less to greater excellence, and exhibits the collective knowledge of different ages and various professions. Memory is the purveyor of reason, the power which places those images before the mind upon which the judgment is to be exercised, and which treasures up the determinations that are once past as the rule of future action, or grounded of subsequent conclusions. It is indeed the faculty of remembrance which may be said to place us in the class of moral agents. If we were to act only in consequence of some immediate impulse, and receive no direction from internal motives of choice, we should be pushed forward by an invisible fatality, without power or reason, for the most part to prefer one thing to another, because we could make no comparison but of objects which might both happen to be present. We owe to memory not only the increase of our knowledge and our progress in rational inquiries, but many other intellectual pleasures. Indeed, almost all that we can be said to enjoy is past or future. The present is in perpetual motion, leaves us as soon as it arrives, ceases to be present before its presence is well perceived, and is only known to have existed by the effects which it leaves behind. The greatest part of our ideas arise, therefore, from the view before or behind us, and we are happy or miserable according as we are affected by the survey of our life, or our prospect of future existence. With regard to futurity, when events are at such a distance from us that we cannot take the whole concatenation into our view, we have generally power enough over our imagination to turn it upon pleasing scenes, and can promise ourselves riches, honors, and delights without intermingling those vexations and anxieties with which all human enjoyments are polluted. If fear breaks in on one side and alarms us with dangers and disappointments, we can call in hope on the other, to solace us with rewards and escapes and victories, so that we are seldom without means of palliating remote evils, and can generally soothe ourselves to tranquility whenever any troublesome presage happens to attack us. It is therefore, I believe, much more common for the solitary and thoughtful to amuse themselves with schemes of the future than reviews of the past. For the future is pliant and ductile, and will be easily molded by a strong fancy into any form. But the images which memory presents are of a stubborn and untractable nature. The objects of remembrance have already existed and left their signature behind them, impressed upon the mind, so as to defy all attempts of erasure or of change. As the satisfactions, therefore, arising from memory are less arbitrary, they are more solid, and are indeed the only joys which we can call our own. Whatever we have once reposited, as Dryden expressed it, in the sacred treasure of the past, is out of the reach of accident or violence, nor can be lost either by our own weakness or another's malice. Here's another bit of Latin quote, a poem, I think. Non tanum irratium quadrucunum retro est efficiet, neque defagent infantamque reddit quad fugisem semal hora vexit. And then in English. Be fair or foul, or rain or shine, the joys I have possessed in spite of fate are mine. Not heaven in itself upon the past has power, but what has been, and I have had my hour. Now this might be the translation of that Latin, because the Latin has no name. The English bit is by Dryden. There is certainly no greater happiness than to be able to look back on a life usefully and virtuously employed, to trace our own progress in existence by such tokens as excite neither shame nor sorrow. Life in which nothing has been done or suffered to distinguish one day from another is to him that has passed it as if it had never been, except that he is conscious how ill he has husbanded the great deposit of his Creator. Life made memorable by crimes and diversification, though through its several periods by wickedness, is indeed easily reviewed, but reviewed only with horror and remorse. The great consideration which ought to influence us in the use of the present moment is to arise from the effect which, as well as ill applied, it must have upon the time to come. For though its actual existence be inconceivably short, yet its effects are unlimited, and there is not the smallest point of time but may extend its consequences either to our hurt or to our advantage, through all eternity, and give us reason to remember it forever, with anguish or exultation. The time of life in which memory seems particularly to claim predominance over the other faculties of the mind is our declining age. It has been remarked by former writers that old men are generally narrative and fall easily into recitals of past transactions and accounts of persons known to them in their youth. When we approach the verge of the grave, it is more eminently true. And here's a quote, Latin: Vitae summa brevis spem non se insucur longum. And then in English, lifespan forbids thee to extend thy cares and stretch thy hopes beyond thy years. Wow, well put. That's by Creech. We have no longer any possibility of great vicissitudes in our favor. The changes which are to happen in the world will come too late for our accommodation, and those who have no hope before them, and to whom their present state is painful and irksome, must of necessity turn their thoughts back to try what retrospect will afford. It ought, therefore, to be the care of those who wish to pass the last hours with comfort, to lay up such a treasure of pleasing ideas as shall support the expenses of that time, which is to depend wholly upon the fund already acquired. Wow. And more of a quote, here's Latin. Petit hin juvenaque acquies finans annum, can't read it, certium misertique vitae canis. So hard to read, it's so small. In English, seek here, ye young, the anchor of your mind. Here, suffering age, a blessed provision find. Elphiston. In youth, however unhappy, we solace ourselves with the hope of better fortune, and however vicious, appease our consciences with intentions of repentance. But the time comes at last in which life has no more to promise, in which happiness can be drawn only from recollection, and virtue will be all that we can recollect with pleasure. Very nice. Take care.